Good morning. I like that enthusiasm. Hello to all of you here in our worship center. It must be spring. Everyone's coming out of hibernation. So good to see you all. Hello to everyone tuning in online, firstfree.tv or otherwise viewing from wherever you might be. Welcome. If you are here in our facility and you're new, if you're just joining us here for the first time, I know we say it every single week in our video announcements. Just want you to know that we're happy you're here, happy you're joining us. You might just be checking us out for the first time. My recommendation is this. I know sometimes you can come to a facility like this or a group of people like this and, oh my goodness, it can seem overwhelming. Maybe I don't really have a place here. I'm just a face in the crowd. My challenge to you is before you leave here, just introduce yourself to someone and please stop by our First Free Central, the wood circular desk in the gym. Ask any question that you have about who we are, what we do, how you can get involved, and we have a free gift waiting for you as well. One other thing before we dive in, I want to say it now in case I forget. After every service, we have people from our First Free prayer teams up here. If you're just going through life, it happens for all of us, but if you're just going through a situation, maybe it's relational, financial, a family, a marriage, an addiction, if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, whatever it might be, and you're here with us today, and you could just really appreciate someone to stand with you, hear you out, just listen to you, know that you're not alone, would you please come forward? Doesn't matter what it is that you're going through, we just want to be here, stand with you, hear what's going on in your life, and be a voice of encouragement and support for you. So please, at the end of the service, come forward and meet with one of our prayer team members. We have been going through a series in the book of Romans, just verse by verse by verse, book by book, chapter by chapter, I should say. And we are going to Romans chapter 13 today. And, when Shane and myself and Brian, our teaching team, when we sit down and kind of cut this thing up, and you're going to preach on this, and you're going to preach on this, and I'm going to take this, and you're going to take that. And there's certain pieces of scripture that we look ahead and we read through, okay, I'm going to be preaching on this, and we get super excited, like, oh, I can't wait to preach on that. I'm really excited. I'm going to dive into that. I can't wait to get to that week. This week hasn't necessarily been that feeling, not because I don't have a conviction about it, because I truly do, and not because I don't think it's important, because I think it's vitally important. It's because we're going to look at today can easily be such a divisive topic in our cultures, in our communities, in our workplaces, and even in our churches. It can be so divisive that sometimes we lose sight of the church and we draw lines and we make enemies and friends, and it can tear things apart. And so if you've ever been a part of a family where you were going to sit down to a holiday meal and they went through the ground rules, and there's two topics they said you don't discuss, religion and politics, that's going to get real messy today. It's going to get real messy today. Because we're looking at what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 13, 1 through 7. He's talking about this idea of authority and submission. And ultimately, the one word I put on it is allegiance. Where is my allegiance? And I want us to wrestle with ideas today. I want us to ask questions that maybe we haven't felt the freedom to ask. I want us to wrestle with ideas that maybe we never thought to wrestle with. I want us to confront preconceived ideas that we have had. And I want us, hopefully, to walk away from here asking ourselves the question of where does my true just allegiance lie? And so before we go into Romans chapter 13, there's a couple things I want to do. First, because we say this over and over again, like, when Paul or any of the biblical writers are writing these letters or these books, they're not doing it and dividing it up into verses and chapters. This is just one letter, right? And sometimes we lose sight of that. And so I actually just felt led yesterday. It wasn't a part of my plan originally. I just felt led yesterday that I'm just going to read through some of the verses that we went through in Romans chapter 12 that were so beautiful, so uniting, so life-giving, and even just these bullet points of, man, this is what it looks like to live as a Christian in your world. This is what it looks like to be a peculiar people. It's what the title we put on. This is what it looks like to be a Christian. And so with God's grace and kindness, I just want to read through some of these verses and allow that to be the foundation and the framework for how we move forward. I don't have a slide. I'm actually going to read out of the Bible, which is weird. I know. Whew. What is it? Okay. Paul says this in the beginning of Romans chapter 12, right? He says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, in view of what he's done, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Offer yourselves to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Go to verse chapter 9. He starts talking about these bullet points. This is what it looks like. These are real practical characteristics of being a Christian in the world today. He starts with love. Begin with love, and love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need and practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited or think too highly of yourself. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it's written, it's mine to avenge, and I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, instead, what you should do is if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. In this doing, you heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This beautiful list, this is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus in the world. Some of it seems common sense. Sometimes it gets tricky, a little bit muddy. How do I do that in a real way? That's the questions I want to ask. This topic has a heavy place in my heart, and what I'm going to give to you is a lot of just sincere sitting before the Lord and things that he has shown me and my perspective, and I'm just going to be honest about that. This is where God has brought me in these passages, along with research and study and so on and so forth. But I ask for that sense of humility and that brotherly love amongst one another as we look at a difficult topic that sometimes can be hard to discuss. Finally, 4 things I want to lay down as ground rules before we get to Romans chapter 13. If you've never read Romans chapter 13, you're kind of like, would you just get to it? Like, what is it? First ground rule is this. Paul is writing this to a Christian audience. Paul is writing this to a Christian audience. It's important to know that. I think it's important to know that because some of the things we're going to look at, some of the ideas we're going to discuss can get muddy once you bring it into our time frame today if we don't see it from the perspective of being a follower of Christ. Because sometimes doing the thing that Christ calls us to do is right in line with everyone else. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral and ethical thing to do. And sometimes obeying Christ is contrary to our culture and society. Right? So he's writing to a Christian audience to have the perspective of, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, this might be the approach we need to have when it comes to authority and submission and government and so on and so forth. If you don't have that perspective, then what reason would you have to look at it from that way? Okay, but he is writing to a Christian audience. If we call ourselves Christians, then we have to approach it from that point of view as well. Second, he's writing it to a Roman Empire. Some scholars and pastors say, well, it really doesn't matter. I think it does matter. I absolutely think it matters. We live in a 2019 world in America that is not it's not an empire, right? That's not the way that we look at it. We're not living in an empire. If we don't like a particular person who's in government, we have the chance in 3-4 years to try to choose someone else. It's not the case in an empire. If you don't like Caesar, you don't get to wait 2 years and then try to elect someone else. It's a different political system. So I have to understand that. Third thing is I think Paul is truly talking about, and I'm going to dive into this a little bit more, I truly think he's talking about ideal forms of leadership and authority. The ideal, where someone is truly acting as an extension of God's system of judgment and authority and mercy and grace and the fruit of his Spirit, not necessarily just the what ifs, and we'll talk about that in a second. Finally, I want us to understand that this is Paul writing this text. Paul, who was arrested on multiple occasions, is writing this saying, submit to authority. So, Paul is telling us, submit to authority, do not rebel against authority. He's also the one who spent a few years in jail for going against authority. So with all of that as our groundwork, let's look at what Paul writes in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7, and just dive headfirst into a topic that I think is so important to address, but difficult to speak about. Paul says this, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which has been established by God. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authorities, rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do bear the sword. They do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Finally, he says this, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." Let's pray. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for your truth. I thank you for your mercy, your grace, and your love. God, I just specifically pray your Holy Spirit to just give us, your presence to give us a sense of humility, an openness to hear what maybe we've already drawn lines about. And God, I just pray that you would allow us through your grace to understand and wrestle with difficult ideas, to know what does it mean to be submitted to you first and foremost, and how does that play out as followers of you in this world today. In your name, amen. I'm guessing it didn't take very long if you were to give me an answer in seconds for how long it took you to realize that this could be a difficult topic to discuss, right? Let me share one scholar's quote. J.C. O'Neill says this about these verses. "These 7 verses have caused more unhappiness and misery in the Christian East and West than any other 7 verses in the New Testament." These 7 verses have caused more unhappiness and misery in the Christian East and West than any other 7 verses in the New Testament. Now, depending on what kind of tradition of the church, if you're raised in the church, you might think that some of the other verses that Paul writes are the most controversial. These 7 verses have caused extreme unhappiness and misery. How? If you were to leave here today, pull out your phone, go on your laptop, your computer, whatever it might be, and do a search about Romans 13 throughout history, what you find is that some of the greatest atrocities that have happened in this world, some of the greatest movements of injustice have been fueled and justified because of Romans chapter 13. Again, I'm just going to be blunt. I'm just going to, whatever. I'm just going to be honest here, right? Like, you start doing a search. You start finding that things like treatment of Native Americans, American Indigenous here in America and in Australia was justified by Romans chapter 13. It's the law. You just obey the law. It's the authorities. Slavery in the United States was justified by Romans chapter 13. This is the law. You just do what's told. Well, the church says nothing in so many ways. Not all the time. Civil rights movement was pushed against because of Romans chapter 13. These are the laws. This is what's required of us. Women's rights and women's suffrage was pushed against because of Romans chapter 13. These are the laws. This is what we do. Acts of genocide throughout the world, justified by Romans chapter 13. These are the laws. This is what our authority requires of us. This is just what we do. You don't go against authority. Do you see what I'm saying? Even up until last year, Romans chapter 13 was cited by our own government on issues of social justice. This is just what you do. Romans chapter 13, you do what's told. See, these 7 verses have caused more unhappiness and misery because authority does come from God and could be used to do incredible things. But authority can also be used outside of God's alignment in nature to do terrible things. Which brings me back to my question of, where does my heart really lie? Where is my allegiance? Let's take a quick break and think about middle school Jon Reiner. Seems like a good intermission. Middle school Jon Reiner. Imagine, if you will, a bright blonde flowing bowl cut. It's right about here, meticulously parted down the middle, framing my face like a beautiful angel. Just right here, flowing in the wind whenever I ran, as opposed to now when I just feel the wind anytime I run. not particularly astute when it comes to academics. Let's just imagine that school starts at 8:15 in the morning. At 8:14 and 45 seconds, I'm still standing at my locker trying to figure out where everything is because it was the biggest mess. Like, I was that kid. If you ever went to school and you're like, there's the one kid who never cleaned their locker, it was disgusting, and maybe there was a sandwich from like 2 months ago in there. Hey-o. So I'm running just before the bell rings, right? I get in my seat right before the bell rings. Teacher gets up, welcomes everyone to homeroom, blah, 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 blah. Please wait for our morning announcements. I don't know what kind of school you went to, but when morning announcements came on, it sounded like this.
Good morning, students. This is your principal speaking. The girls' basketball team won last night. Way to go, ladies. The boys failed to win, but they gave a great effort. Well done, boys. Only a 40-point loss. For lunch today will be tater tot casserole with mushy corn, fruit salad cocktail that's been sitting in a jar for 12 months, and some chocolate pudding. Sign up for white milk or chocolate milk with your homeroom teacher. Now would you please stand for the
Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone stands, directs themselves to where the flag is, right? Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and so on and so forth. Take your seats. Some of you might take your seats. Now, John, I was raised, and I am not, whatever, I make jokes about it, but I was raised in a Christian home, which I'm very grateful for, a Christian family, very active in our church. So Sunday school, children's church, midweek programs, night programs, week programs, weekend programs. And I also attended a private Christian school from the first day of kindergarten to my last day of high school graduation. I was like groomed to be what you now see. Every single year, biblical studies and academics. So, whereas you may have taken your seat after that, on any given day, we may not have taken our seat. And instead, it was, please stay standing for the pledge to the Christian flag. There's a Christian flag? Yeah. It's white with like a blue square and a red cross in the middle. Pledge allegiance to the Christian flag. Some of you might sit after that. Depending on what program you're in or what school you're in, please stay standing for the pledge to the Bible. Pledge allegiance to the Bible. 30 minutes later, you can take your seat. You didn't really think much of it. That's the world I lived in. You pledge allegiance to the country. You pledge allegiance to your faith. You pledge allegiance to the Bible. It's right around middle school, though. One of those catalyst, unexpected, weird coincidence moments. My parents received this 3-disc, 3-CD set from Focus on the Family Radio Theater. It's a dramatized version of the life of a man by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm in middle school. So I did what any middle schooler would do when you saw that your parents got CDs in the mail. I stole it, and I brought it up to my CD player. Put on my CD player, and I press play. I'm sitting in my room. The first thing that you hear is Hitler speaking. So I did what anyone would do. I pressed pause, turned it off, and thought to myself, what are my parents into? Why are my parents getting Hitler speeches in the mail? That's weird. I keep listening to it. It's a 3-hour dramatization of the life of this man by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I can't go into his whole life. If you want more, you can invite me out to dinner and pay for it, and I'll tell you all about Bonhoeffer's life. Come on now. Bonhoeffer is this young man who grew up in a relatively conservative, for the most part, Christian, traditional Christian Lutheran home. His father was a genius, the leading psychiatrist, psychologist in all of Germany at the time. His brother was a genius. He worked on splitting the atom. Bonhoeffer, when Dietrich decides what he wants to do, he decides, I'm going to go into ministry. He was a boy during World War I. One of his older brothers died fighting in World War I. And he grew up in a world that many of us grow up in, and it's understandably so. He grew up in this world that was taught, and theology taught, because prominent theologians throughout church history have taught, that we live in a world with 2 different kingdoms, and one kingdom is the government and political and the natural and all that, and one kingdom is the spiritual and the church and so on and so forth, and this authority is here, and this authority is here, and never the two shall meet. You just divide the two. This world exists, and this world exists. So as a young man, he's taught, like, your best duty, your biggest duty is to be a proponent and a follower and devoted to your country and so on and so forth, while he's wrestling with questions of faith. And he's a young kid and he's wrestling with questions in his confirmation class that his pastor can't really answer. But he becomes this theological genius. After his brother dies in World War I, he decides, I'm going to go into studying theology. They tried to push him against it because he thought it might be a waste of your academics. But he said, no, I just feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. So he does it. At the age of 21, he graduates with his doctorate summa cum laude at the age of 21. He's called the theological genius for his day. But he can't be a pastor in Germany until he's 25, so he has 4 years of just kind of bumming it, right? So he goes to Barcelona, and he works in some of the slums. He grew up in a pretty wealthy home, even when Germany hits this hyperinflation and depression in between the wars, his family is doing fine. So he goes to the United States, and he spends a few years in Harlem at a seminary doing a student teaching coalition type of thing, and for the first time, he starts wrestling with questions that he didn't even know he needed to ask. He comes to America and he sees segregation for the first time. Why in the world can't some people go to certain restaurants while other people can? Doesn't make sense. What is that about? Not knowing the precursor that it would be for the world that he goes back to in Germany with the treatment of the Jews. He starts wrestling with questions with some of his fellow seminary students who are from other places of the world, and they ask him a profound question that would wrestle in his heart until the moment that he died. It's a question that even as a middle schooler, as I'm listening to this CD thing for the first time, made me start to wrestle with. And it's a question I want us to leave here wrestling with. He was asked, well, Dietrich, what are you first? What do you mean, what am I first? Are you German or are you Christian? So I'm both. He said, that's fantastic. What if you can't be both? What if there's a moment or a decision? What if there's actions? What if there's a scene or scenario where you can't wholeheartedly be both? Where your pledge of allegiance doesn't count for both sides? What do you do? And all of a sudden, he goes in this headspin. He starts diving into questions. He said that he was a theologian who became a Christian. He starts looking at Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and he starts wrestling with ideas. And those ideas would fuel his further journeys as he heads back to Germany and is involved with what he was involved in. And I'll get back to that at the end of this today. But as I'm sitting there as a middle schooler, I listened to it once. I listened to it twice. I listened to it again. I listened to it till so scratched out after hundreds of times of listening to it. You would think, well, you'd go on to a different book, John. Further your study. So I did. So a snapshot into me, I went on to study theology after high school, and then I went on to get a master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. For 3 or 4 years, every single day of my life was spent looking at the most horrendous crimes against humanity, atrocities, firsthand accounts, pictures, videos, stories, listening to voices of individuals who have been caught under a wheel of oppression. And I started asking myself some of the same questions that Bonhoeffer asked, that he wrestled with, I started to wrestle with. And this question that I want to plant in your head that hopefully you can never get away from. What am I first? Where does my heart really lie? What is the primary motivating principle for the decisions that I make? God help me, and I will always do everything I can to be in a place where I can be both. I can be wholehearted this and a Christian, but what if is the question I want to propose. What if? What happens if I have to choose? So I want to break this up into ideals. I said at the beginning, I think Paul is talking about an ideal scenario of authority. And hopefully we'll defend that throughout today. So I'm going to look at this verse by verse, and as if ideally, right, all authority is an extension of God's authority. That all justice is an extension of God's justice, that all characteristics of our society, no matter what it is, are an extension of who God is and represent the fruit of his nature and spirit and morality and ethics, so on and so forth. So that's how we're going to start, okay? So, first of all, he says this, all authority comes from God. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which has been established by God. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Now, right from the beginning, we have this divide between the ways that this has been interpreted in the past and the ways that some people have interpreted on the other side. And I have been surprised. I will be honest with you. Yesterday before speaking, I thought I was going to puke to get on the stage and talk about politics and faith. But some people came up to me and were astounded about the two different views of viewing this and thought, man, I always thought this one way was the only way you had to view it. For some people, not everyone, but for some people, they view this verse as saying that every single person, individual individual person in a position of authority has been specifically designed, selected, and implemented by God to carry out everything that they would carry out. Every single individual of authority has been selected by God to be in a position of power to do everything that they would carry out in whatever capacity they have to do everything that it is that they would do has been ordained and designed by God. Okay? The other side of it are individuals who say all authority does come from God. Just hear me out. That as a Christian, again, I have to view this as a Christian. If I view this as a Christian, then I understand that God, I believe, is the source of all authority. He is the King of kings. He is the Lord of lords. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and the end. He is the creator of all. So all authority does come from him. And so the idea of authority is not a bad thing, which is something some of us need to wrestle with. Some of us hate the idea of authority. No one can pin me down. No one can tell me what to do. I'm going to be my own authority. I don't want to listen to anyone, blah, 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 blah. And I think what Paul's saying is like, no, that's wrong. Authority is good, and authority does come from God. But I think what he's saying is that all authority does come from God, and the ideal would say that every person in a position of authority would be in alignment with that characteristic of God, would be an extension of God's nature, would be an extension of God's justice, would be an extension of God's fruit, of who he is. In the ideal, I should be able to submit to whoever is in authority because they should be acting in the best interests of individual just as God would do, as his interpretation, and as he exhibits justice and mercy and grace and whatever else it might be. That should be the ideal. But for some people, it is every single person in every single role of authority has been designed by God to do everything that they do. Me, just being honest, I have a hard time going there. I have a hard time saying that every single leader that has ever existed and every person who has had any sort of role of authority has been specifically put there by God to do everything that they would do, because then I have to face some of the leaders throughout history who have done mass atrocities and said, well, that was God. So I have to look at the what-ifs. I have to look at the Stalins. I have to look at the Hitlers. I have to look at the Pol Pots in Cambodia. I have to look at the leaders of Syria and the Sudan. I have to look at individuals who have done terrible things and said, well, Romans 13, that's God. And too often what happens then, if you look at throughout history, too often what happens in those series of injustice is that when they're done, the church is faced and left to face asking these questions: what could we have done? What should we have done? Rather than asking the question of what can we do and what should we do? If I simply say, well, that's God, God put that person in there to do whatever they're going to do, then I have to also acknowledge that whatever happens, I'm just saying, well, that was God. I have a hard time with that one. But I do believe that all authority does come from God. And I think in the ideal world, a person who is in authority would be an extension of who God is and his nature. And sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But in an ideal, I should submit to those who are in authority over me. It doesn't mean every single person is going to be perfect, right? And we'll get to that in a second. It doesn't mean every single person is going to do everything that I like and everything is going to be perfect and every decision that they make is going to be great. But it means that as long as they're not, and you're going to hear me use this phrase a lot, as long as they're not intentionally, habitually, and unrepentantly living in a lifestyle that's contrary to the system of God, whether they're a believer or not, but they're acting with God's same ideas of ethics and morality, then I should put myself in a place where I recognize they have authority over me, and I listen and I obey and I do what's asked of me. Because I think authority is good. I think authority is healthy. And I shouldn't be the person that has that attitude that's always fighting against authority. No one can tell me what to do. I don't have to submit to everyone. I can do this, I can do that. I can drag people's name through the mud. I can do whatever I want. I can live this rebellious, pushing against the tide all the time attitude. I think what Paul is saying, no, authority is good and authority has been given us by God. Now, even though we're going to look a lot specifically at this idea of government, let's just broaden that a second, right? Like, let's just try to put it into our world a little bit more practically as far as roles of authority. Maybe I'm an employee, right, at a business, and I have a boss. Now, as long as my boss is not intentionally, habitually, and always in a way like repetitive behaviors, creating a reputation of being immoral and unethical, then I should recognize that they're my boss, and I do everything I can to be the best employee and the best example of a Christian employee in that workplace that I should be, and I can be. I'm not dragging my boss in the mud. I'm not always playing devil's advocate. I'm not pushing against them. I'm not questioning everything they do. I'm not being that person. I'm doing what's asked, and I'm doing everything to the best of my ability to be the best example I can be of a follower of Jesus in that place of employment. The other demographic I thought of, just knowing our congregations, we have a lot of students who come here. Sometimes students like their professors, sometimes they don't. Sometimes like faculty, sometimes they don't, right? But as long as my professor is not forcing me to do something that's contrary to the will of God, if he's informing me of something that might be contrary, but it's a part of my class, it's part of your class. But as long as my professor, your faculty, is not intentionally, habitually, and constantly creating a reputation of behavior that is unethical and immoral, if I'm a student, I recognize the professor, and I do what's asked of me, and I be the best example that I possibly can be of a student in that institution. I submit to authority because authority is good. Second thing that he says in verse 2, don't rebel against authority. Consequently, now in light of this, in the ideal world, if that individual is acting as an extension of God's justice and nature and authority, then whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Right? Like if I'm obeying this one, but they're aligned with God, then I'm obeying both. And so for me to rebel against what a person of authority has been put in my life, to constantly rebel against them, is in effect rebelling against God and what I'm supposed to be doing in submitting to authority. Don't put yourself in a position where you're constantly pushing, constantly going against it, constantly unwilling to submit to authority in your life. Verse 3, true government maintains justice. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. What's he saying? True government, the function of true justice and authority in government is meant to maintain justice. There is a positive aspect of that, and there is a practical negative aspect of that. The positive aspect is that it's helping us for our good, is what he's going to say in the next verse. It's for our good. If God has a moral and ethical law that says do not kill someone, and my law in my country says do not kill someone, then that law is actually helping me live out a life of faithfulness before God. It's helping me not sin. If God's law says do not steal, and my laws in my nation say do not steal, then that is actually helping me live in obedience to God and not sin. It's meant to be for my good. Authority throughout Scripture was even meant to hinder us from living a rampant lifestyle of sin against God. Certain laws are for our good, structures for our good. And so what he's saying is if a leader of authority is in a position where they truly are an extension of God's nature, I should submit to them, I should not rebel for them, because I should know I shouldn't have to be afraid of them if I'm doing what's right in an ideal world. I shouldn't have to be afraid of the people in power. I shouldn't be afraid of the people who have authority. I should be willing to submit to them because I truly believe that they have my best interests and the best interests of the people in my society in mind, or my workplace or my school in mind. So I should be willing to submit to that. And I shouldn't be afraid of them because as long as I'm doing what's right, I shouldn't be afraid of consequences. The negative side of that, the positive side, is that their authority and structure is meant to enforce good. The other side of it is that they enforce justice by recognizing errors in that system and punishing it. For the one in authority is God's servant, verse 4, for your good. But if you do wrong, then you should be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants and agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. If I'm in a workplace and I'm constantly not doing what's asked of me, pushing against the rules, pushing against authority, not really listening, disrespectful, don't be surprised if you get a citation or if you get written up or if you get fired. It's meant to have a construct for your good, and if you're constantly going against it, understand that there's consequences. If you're a student, you don't like your professor, I'm not going to do whatever they say, I'm not going to do my work, I'm not going to do it, and then you get your transcript and you're like, what, an F? Yes, an F. You didn't do anything that was asked of you. If I'm a citizen, I just like, I'm not going to obey this speed limit. I'm going to drive that's what I want to. And you get pulled over and get a ticket. Don't be surprised. There's certain laws put in place for the relative good. I'm not saying that the speed limit is a moral or ethical thing, but it's a law. It's not violating my moral or ethics. It's a speed limit. So I should obey it, and I shouldn't be afraid in an ideal world of going by a cop just because I'm going 15 over. I should be afraid if I'm violating the speed limit, right? That's when you go past the cop and you're like, no way he saw me, right? I shouldn't have to live in that place if I'm doing what's asked of me. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I should be able to submit. I shouldn't have a fear that I'm going to face the consequences. I should be willing to have a healthy understanding of authority and submit to it as long as I know that's an extension of God's idea of justice and not habitually and intentionally in a place of constant repetitive behavior that is unethical and immoral. I should be willing to submit to that. Submit to ideal authority. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also a matter of conscience. Even though whoever is in authority isn't necessarily a perfect individual, if they're not, again, intentionally, habitually, repetitive behavior that's constantly immoral and unethical, if they're still someone in alignment for my good, and it's a system that it's not pushing against my morality and their alignment with God's idea of justice, then I should be willing and able to live in submission to that authority for two reasons. One, because I understand if I don't, that there's consequences. And that's okay. It's okay to be mindful of the fact that there's consequences for going against it. Because again, ultimately and ideally, this is supposed to be for my good. Knowing I could be sent to prison for robbing you is an okay motivation for me not to rob you. Right? Being incarcerated for doing something that breaks the law is an okay motivation for me not doing it. Knowing I can lose my job if I'm constantly complaining, not doing its asked of me, not showing up on time, not going through with what it was called, and not respecting authority, knowing that I can lose my job is it's okay to know that that could be a consequence for me to do my job well. It's not bad knowing that that's in the back of my head. But it's also a matter of conscience. Not just because there could be punishment, but because ideally and ultimately, by submitting to authority, I'm also submitting to God and doing what he asks me to do in this context. It's not just about whether I like whoever is in authority over me. It's about if I truly believe that this isn't an ethical or moral thing. I can have preferences against, but it's not an ethical or moral thing. Then I'm actually submitting to God as well. Now it's a matter of conscience and how I actually submit to what God is calling me to do, not just because of the punishment that could come, but because I truly want to live in alignment with what God calls me to do as a follower of who he is. And finally, he says, do what's asked. That's why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. In other words, just do what's asked of you. Do what's asked. If I'm an employee in a place and my boss is not constantly in a place of unethical or immoral behavior that's putting against my view of God, then do what's asked. I do what's asked of me. I submit to that authority. I show them respect. I show them honor. Because that's what's at. I want to be the best example that I possibly can be as a follower of Christ in that workplace and give them no reason to think otherwise about me. Same thing as a student in your place of whatever it is that you're studying. Be the best example of a student for Christ that you possibly can be. Same thing in my community, in my culture. What the laws are asking me, to the best of my ability, I'm going to do everything that I can. As long as it's not contrary to my morals or ethics of what Christ calls me to do, I'm going to do what is asked of me. So as long as I see that authority is an extension of God, I shouldn't rebel against it because that's also rebelling against God. I should be okay knowing that there is a negative consequence that could come from it. I understand that it's for my good. I submit to that authority. I simply do what is asked of me. In an ideal framework, I think this is what Paul is saying. This is who you should be. So when we're talking about Christians and the ideal, before we switch to Christians and the what if, and Christians and the ideal, there's a couple questions we should ask. Because even if we're in a place where it's not an ethical or moral, it's just sometimes we just have tension with people, right? Sometimes we just clash, we don't always get along. So what do I do then? Like, how do I live this out and submit myself to Christ and submit myself to leadership, even in times when it's difficult? The first thing is a question I'm going to ask in both sides of this idea, but the first question is, where's my true allegiance? And I really want that to be the framework in whatever scenario I walk into. If I'm walking into a job, I need to first and foremost ask myself, who am I really? Where's my true priority? Where's my true allegiance? Is it to Christ or is it to this place that I work? Where's my true allegiance? What is the main motivating factor of the decisions that I make? Where is my true allegiance? The second thing is this: is this preference or is it sin? Allow yourself to ask that question. Is the reason I'm not getting along with a person in authority a preference or a sin? And if it's in the ideal, then we're talking really about preference here. I don't really like their time management. I don't really like their organization. I don't really like how they do things. I don't really like how they spend their time. I don't really like how they do that. I don't really like the thing. If it's not an ethical and moral issue, if it's just a preference, suck it up, buttercup. Just do your job, right? Like, if it's a preference, to the best of your ability, show respect, show honor, recognize their position, recognize who you are, do what's asked of you, and be the model example of an employee or student or citizen within that construct. Be the best version of a Christian that you could possibly be in that place. Submit to authority and just do what's asked of you. Practice humility and do what's asked. Allow yourself to be humble. Say, you know what, I'm not going to keep pushing against it. Yeah, I believe that authority is good. I think all authority in whatever framework or structure comes from God, and so I'm going to submit to whatever authority is under me. I'm going to recognize that. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to give honor where honor is due, respect where respect is due. I'm going to give the task when the task is due. I'm going to do what's asked of me because that's what's being asked of me, and I'm going to submit to authority because I also know I'm submitting to God. It's not just a matter of punishment, it's also a matter of conscience. I'm going to do what God asked me to do in this situation. In humility, I'm going to do what's asked. But if it's still an issue, and it's becoming to that point where it's becoming really easy to look at that individual in authority with a negative way and belittle them or gossip about them, disrespect them, drag their reputation through the mud, and I'm not really living anymore in submission to what God calls me to do according to his characteristics, then I would say ask yourself this question, if possible and necessary, can you remove yourself? So I think it's possible to say, look, I keep butting heads or just a personalities clash. It's a preference thing. It's not a moral, ethical thing, but my boss or my professor, whatever it might be, I have a difficult time. Is this a scenario where I can remove myself? Can I ask myself the question, is this enough of a reason for me to find a job somewhere else? Because I don't want this to be a character thing. I understand that I'm submitting to God. They're in a position of authority. I may not like it because of preferences, but if that's the case, then I think I can still maintain respect, honor, a character before God, and simply say, look, I'm going to honor you enough and respect you enough to no longer just be here, because I think that's a better alternative than living in a place of bitterness and a grudge and gossip and dragging them through the mud and tearing apart their reputation. I think it's a better alternative to see if I can remove myself rather than dragging them through the mud and just saying, well, I'm just going to have to endure this, but I'm going to do it with a negative attitude and not follow the example of Christ. Does that make sense? If I'm a student, I don't really like my professor. I just clash all the time. I just really don't think he likes me. It is blah, blah, blah. 99% of the time, I would say just be a student, get through the semester, right? But if it's truly just a toxic environment, go to your registrar's office. Is there another professor teaching his class? I respect that he's a teacher. I respect his credentials. I respect who he is. He's the teacher of the class. I'm a student. It's just I keep clashing. Is there another class I can take? You can still live out an example of Christ-like attitude and submission to authority by removing yourself and acknowledging who they are. Okay, so that I think is the Christian in the ideal. An ideal scenario, I should see that all authority comes from God, he's the source of all of it. Anyone who is acting it, hopefully is in a place where they're submitted to him, and they're carrying out his standard of justice and his characteristics, so on and so forth. So I should submit myself to them, understanding if I don't, there's consequences. I shouldn't be in fear of the consequences. I should submit because I know in my good conscience, if I'm following that authority, I'm also following Christ, so on and so forth, and then just do what's asked of me. In the ideal. And what about the what if? And by what if, I mean a person of authority, let's just expand it, a boss, faculty, professor, teacher, politician, leader, political leader, intentionally, habitually, constantly living in a place contrary to the ethics and morality of God, constantly living in a place that is against the character and nature of God, where they're no longer aligning themselves with God's leadership of justice and mercy, acting in their own self-interest, then what do I do? Then what do I do? I still have to ask the question, where's my true allegiance? It starts to get more difficult then. Because in the ideal world, I can do everything both. I can do both. I can be submissive. I can recognize authority. But I don't want to be in a place where I ask a whole lot of what could I have and what should I have done, rather than asking what can I do and what should I do, when I start to realize people in authority around me misusing that authority, doing things contrary to what Christ would call me to do as a follower of him, and I start to wrestle with that in this moment. What is the motivating factor? What am I really? And even though I want us to apply this to our workplaces, I want us to apply this to our schools because I think that's our demographic, I think all of us can also apply it to what do I do when I'm caught with that Bonhoeffer question of Christ and nation? Christ in politics, whether it's local, district, regional, state, national. Where is my true allegiance? Do I view this from the perspective of my allegiance or not? If my allegiance is to my particular nation or country of origin, if my allegiance is primarily to my particular political party or my particular politician, then it can make sense why I would make certain decisions, not what Christ would call me to do, but what's in the best interest of this. But if I'm going to say that God is my primary source of priority in the decisions that I make, and he ultimately has my allegiance, then I have to start wrestling with questions of how can I be a follower of Christ in the midst of also living in a nation that's not. Where is my true allegiance? And you can't have that question, you can't bring that up without bringing up two words that are probably very uncomfortable to hear in a church. Ends with disobedience. Starts with civil. Is there ever a place for civil disobedience? I mean, let's just talk about it. Johnny, you really bring this up? Apparently. Is there ever a place? Is there ever a place to push back against laws? Is there ever a place to push back against politicians? Is there ever a place to push back against political parties? Is there ever a place to push back against authorities? Because my true allegiance is first and foremost to Christ. Is there ever a place and a time? As uncomfortable as that might be, let's first ask a different question. What about, are there examples of civil disobedience in the Bible? Let's start with the Bible. Is there ever anyone who breaks the laws in the Bible? Is there ever any examples of someone who goes against the tide, goes against government authorities, goes against political authorities, and it's not negative? Let's start there. I like thinking about Exodus chapter 1 and the midwives in Egypt. See, there was this order given out from the Egyptian authorities that to all midwives, that as they were in the process of helping women giving birth, if there were babies who were boys who were born, that they were to be identified and murdered. It was a mandate from the government to execute young children. What did they do? Some of them didn't. Some of them knowingly, knowing that this was a mandate from their government, didn't do it. Stood up against it, refused to do it, and because of that, we have an individual in the Bible named Moses. Civil disobedience, and yet it was seen as the fear of God and an act of faith. Are we all comfortable? Rahab. Oh, Rahab. Joshua chapter 2, Rahab was a prostitute in the city of Jericho. And as the people of Israel were surrounding the city, they sent spies into this city to scope it out, right? And you have this prostitute Rahab, and what we find out is that the city was, they knew that the people of Israel were surrounded, and they knew that individuals had come into the city, and so Rahab is in this position where she's in contact somehow with these spies, and she hides them. These people from a different country that Jericho was looking for, other individuals from a different country were in there, and she's hiding these individuals from a different country. And when they come, the civil authorities come and say, hey, we know that individuals from that other country, that other nation were in your home. Where are they? She says this, oh, you're right, they were here a little bit ago, but they went that way. You should follow and find out, because that sounds bad. But where were they? They're in the house hiding. She straight up lied to her authorities to hide individuals from another nation who were in there because she had the fear of the Lord to do something that was different than what her government was calling her to do. And if you fast forward to Hebrews chapter 11, she is listed in the Hall of Fame of faith for doing what she did. She lied. She concealed individuals. She lied to her authorities. And yet, by faith, Rahab. You could look at the story of Nathan and King David. You might not see this as civil disobedience, but I sure do. David had just had an affair with a woman named Bathsheba. Bathsheba gets pregnant. King David is freaking out. Bathsheba's husband is one of the leaders in the military. And so King David makes an order that her husband gets put with his men on the front lines in the battle, and then once they're on the front lines for everyone else to pull back. So they're all of a sudden on the front lines of a battle without the support of the rest of the army, facing an entire army, knowing that 99% chance that he's going to die. And it does happen. Uriah, the husband, dies, and King David thinks, I'm in the clear now. Like I just, clean. Covered all my bases. Then in 2 Samuel 12, it says a religious man named Nathan has a talk with David. Now, David was a shepherd, so he knew sheep really well. So Nathan tells a story about a man who acts inappropriately, but he uses it within this shepherding context. And he says, David, what should you do about that? And David said, I would be furious. Show me the man that acted so unjustly and so unethically and so immorally who went against God. Show me that man, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And Nathan, this religious leader, is talking to the highest authority in his country, and he's saying, you did it. It was you. You're the one that acted unethically. You're the one that acted immorally. You sinned against God and man. You're guilty. Now, in that moment, if you're king, you could just be like, off of his head. I don't like that. But Nathan does it. Nathan calls out the highest person in his country, and says, what you're doing is wrong. Your actions are wrong. Your ethics are wrong. Your moral is wrong. You're sinning before God and man. Holds him accountable to it, even knowing it could cost him his life. That's radical. It's dangerous. You have Esther and Mordecai in the book of Esther. You have this woman, this man Mordecai, right? He's living in this context with the second highest representative of the country. His name is Haman, and he hates Jews. And he has this idea that as he walks through the streets, everyone is supposed to bow down in respect to Haman. And Mordecai's like, nah, I ain't into that. And infuriates Haman. I ain't going to bow down to you. But a government official told you to. I'm not doing it. To enter into the king's throne room, into his room of judgment and his throne, you have to be actually summoned by the king. Esther, knowing that her whole nation is in threat of genocide, goes through that door and approaches the king, knowing that it could cost her life, goes against the established laws, goes to the king, and intercedes on behalf of her people to save her people, even if it meant breaking the law before the king. You could talk about Daniel. There's a law that's written from the highest authority that says you cannot pray to anyone else except the king. Daniel says, yeah, forget that. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to open the window when I do it. Did anyone break laws? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the same similar story, we're told that you have to bow down to the statue, and you can only worship this statue and this image. They said, I ain't into that. We're going to throw you into a fiery furnace. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but I'm not doing that. You have the apostles in the New Testament who found themselves being arrested over and over again. In Acts chapter 5, the apostles respond to their governing authority, says, yeah, I get it, but there's an authority that I report to that's higher than you. And then the author of our text himself, Paul, who got himself arrested on multiple occasions, spent 2 years in jail at one point, writes some of our best known scriptures while he's sitting in a jail cell. When he's told to be quiet, he keeps going because there's an authority that I report to that's higher than yours. So did anyone disobey laws in the Bible when God called them to do something different? Yes. Did anyone go against the system? Yes. Did anyone fight for a cause? Yes. Did anyone submit themselves to the mandates of God's nature, even in opposition of human authority? Yes. They did. They did. So the Christian and the what if. In his early 1960s, famous and beautiful essay letter called Letters from a Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to his fellow heads of church who were mad at him for his acts in the civil rights movement. And without specifically saying Romans chapter 13, he cites it. He says, here's the thing, guys. There are laws, and then there are laws above those laws. Where's my true allegiance? Where's my true heart? How do I truly act? Because I think that too often we've had this idea, and I don't want anyone leaving here and saying, man, John does not like America. I love America. And I don't say that from ignorance. Been to a lot of different countries around the world, spent a lot of different time with other nation groups. I love America. But when you start to wrestle with this question of where's my true allegiance lie, you start to have to ask difficult questions and other questions. And as much as this might offend some of us, I can no longer sit there and say, well, everything that's Christ is everything elephant. Everything Christ is everything donkey. See, I used animals instead of. Everything Christ is everything red. Everything Christ is everything blue. Everything Christ is red, white, and blue. There are laws, and then there are laws above those laws. Where's my true allegiance? Where's my true heart? Because I don't want to live my life and look back and say, what could I have done and what should we have done? But when we see injustice and oppression and inequality, I'd rather say, what can I do? And what should I do? What is Christ calling me to do in the world that I live in? So the first question of the Christian, the what if, is where is my allegiance? Ask it everywhere I go. What is the main motivating factor of what I'm going to do here? What's the main motivating factor of the decision I'm going to make in this system, in this employment, and whatever it might be? Where's my true allegiance? I really want you to wrestle with that. I don't want you to just answer it quickly and be like, oh, of course it's this. I want you to wrestle with it. Wrestle with it, wrestle with it, wrestle with it. Where's my true allegiance? And then ask the same question, is this preference or is it sin? And the ideal is preference. Certain things I just don't like that they do. I don't like their communications. I don't like their management. I don't like this. I don't like they handle this situation, that situation. I'm not saying everyone's going to be perfect, but if I find myself within a system, an employment, a university, a nation, a government, local or national, if I find myself in a place where there's intentional, habitual, constant behavior that is contrary to the nature of Christ and God in an unethical and immoral way, I have to start asking myself the question, is this preference or is it sin? If it's sin, then I have to start asking some more difficult questions. If I'm in a place of employment and I know that my boss is acting inappropriately and using his authority in an unjust, immoral, and unethical way, I mean, look at our world in the last couple of years. How many individuals of authority have misused their authority for sexual harassment, sexual assault? And people don't say anything. We don't push back, and I get it. We don't talk about it. And sometimes the other people who are witnesses of the victims' atrocities, we don't say anything because it's a person in authority. So I have to start asking myself the question, is this preference or is it sin? University, same thing. We've seen that over and over again. Nation, same thing, over and over again. Is it preference or sin, the reason I don't like what's happening here? And what am I having to wrestle with? And who has my true allegiance? And if I get to the point where it's just enough is enough, and I've seen too much, I've experienced enough, I've heard too much, I can let go of certain other allegiances if my true primary allegiance is Christ, and I have to start asking questions that maybe I was afraid to ask before. I'll start to cross over lines I was never allowed to cross over before, and I have to start asking myself certain questions of if this is sin and it's intentional, habitual, constant reputation of things that are unethical and immoral and against the nature of God, this person is no longer aligned with God's standard of justice. I have to start asking myself the questions. I need to count the cost of action and non-action. If I'm in a place of employee and I know that my boss is constantly and habitually using his authority in an unjust, immoral, and unethical way, what's the cost of doing something? What's the cost of calling it out? What's the cost of blowing the whistle? What's the cost of saying something? My job? It's a real thing. It's money, it's insurance, I get it. It's a real thing. What do I do? How do I handle that? And what's the cost of not saying something? What's the cost of not doing something? Another victim, another life, another person. I don't think it's enough to just say, well, Romans 13. What's the cost of action? What's the cost of non-action? Put it in any other context, employment, student, local government, national government. If my true allegiance is to Christ, first and foremost, I have to ask difficult questions. Finally, this. If this individual and authority is no longer aligning themselves with God's standard of justice and God's standard of mercy and the fruit of God's Spirit, no longer an extension of God, but rather a repetitive, habitual, and intentional reputation of behaviors that are contrary to the system of God. What is getting more glory? Is God getting more glory, or is one of my other fashions of allegiance getting glory? If it's not God getting the most glory and something else, I have to wrestle with this. Like, what is actually being developed? What's actually being secured? What's actually being benefited? Is it God's glory and God's kingdom, or another glory and another kingdom at the expense of God? And I have to wrestle with that question. If this isn't preference and this is sin over and over and over again, and I have to count the cost of action and non-action, finally, I have to get to the place, if I can get to the place, that I must say I have to speak and act in submission to God, even in opposition to human authority. If my primary allegiance is to Jesus, then I can't live my life put in a place of silence, saying nothing as others are caught under the wheel of injustice and oppression or victimized, because someone has the authority to do something, I can no longer put up my hands and say Romans chapter 13, I can't go against you. Instead, I think I actually have an obligation and a responsibility to speak for those who can't speak, to act for those who can't act, to call things out as I see it, in submission to God, to live as a citizen of his kingdom, above and beyond anything else. And sometimes the colors get washed out, and sometimes the lines get a little gray. But I have to follow the leadership of God in my life. Bonhoeffer. I'm not saying that we need to go to the same end as him. That's not the point of this. But he finally got to the point where he asked himself simple questions. And he came to 3 conclusions. As a Christian, as a follower of Christ, it is my responsibility and obligation to hold individuals in authority accountable for what they do, and not simply to remain silent when I see that it's sin. And through that, I must also be willing to come to the aid of anyone who is caught under the wheel of oppression and injustice for the sake of their place in the kingdom of God and as children of God and as human beings created in the image of God. Regardless of what gets more glory, I have to benefit the glory of God in his sense of justice. And number 3, if it means it, as a Christian, I must stand in the gap. I must speak in according to Christ. I must act in submission to Christ. I must do what Christ calls me to do, even in opposition to human authority. Would you stand? I know that I'm probably having you leave here with more questions than answers, and I'm okay with that. It's kind of become my MO at times. But I hope and pray that we wrestle with this. That we don't become another generation who asks more questions like, what could I have done and should I have done, rather than what can I do and what should I do. I no longer put up these things that say, well, this is absolutely Christian, and this is absolutely not, and this is absolutely Christian, and this absolutely not. And I actually just start asking myself the questions of, in any political system, any political party, any nation, what does Christ call me to do? May we then be a peculiar people. Let's pray. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for this body. I thank you for the gift and the honor that it is to meet with every single one of them. I pray that by your Holy Spirit, that whatever is truth would stick, whatever is not would fall, and that you would allow us to walk out of here wrestling with true questions of what it means to be a follower of Jesus in the world today. Talk about things that are uncomfortable. Bring up topics that we shouldn't. Question things that we never thought we could. All not for our glory, but for yours. That we would live in submission to you first and foremost. I ask you bless us and keep us as we leave in your name. Amen.